Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our webcast this week with our founder and president, Helga LaRouche. Today is October 18th, 2019. The last week has been one of very fast-moving and significant developments around Syria, around the China situation, around the political scene in the United States. And Helga, I think it's quite significant now that the president is having a series of rallies to get across his message, since the mainstream media does not intend to let him have his say. How do you see these rallies playing into shifting the situation in the US population?
Well, I think it's very important because, as you say, the mainstream media, both in the United States and in Europe, are absolutely not reporting what Trump is doing, but they are, bringing a completely distorted picture about what he has announced in terms of the Syria pullout, which can only be, characterized as a conscious campaign to deceive the population. I mean, this is not media, this is PR firms run by intelligence agencies to change the axioms of the population. I mean, that's what it is, because there is no bigger discrepancy between what Trump is doing together with Putin, uh, which is really absolutely crucial for world peace, and what the picture you get in these medias. So in these rallies and also in the press conference with the Italian president Mattarella, who visited in the United States, Trump repeated the same story, what he had said in the press conference, namely that it's time to pull the US soldiers out of these endless wars, that the United States has no intention to continue to police the world in 90 countries around the globe, and that should be ended. Now, people should be happy about that, because all of this was very clearly done in coordination with Russia. And, if you want to end the misery in the Middle East countries, terrorism, endless wars, it is very, very clear that only if the United States and Russia and China are working together, that you can solve this problem. So to repeat again, what I mean, all this media that the ceasefire which Pence negotiated with Erdogan is not working, that's just not true. I mean, the reality is the Kurds in the northeast have practically agreed to subordinate to the Syrian government. They will give up their heavy weapons. Turkey will basically agree to this also, and not any longer insist on regime change against the Assad government. So, it's obvious that if you make a ceasefire in such a region, not everybody, not every Kurd will immediately agree. So you will have little interruptions and, skirmishes. But by the large, this is working. And, Erdogan, after meeting with Pence and Pompeo, is now scheduled to go to Moscow on the 22nd of October, where, according to Lavrov, the political solution to this region, to the situation in Syria, including the constitutional council, which will meet, there will be a meeting in Geneva, that will be discussed with Erdogan. So all the signs are really absolutely there that this will function. And, people have such a short memory. I mean, the whole trouble really started with Obama, and people forget that. After Putin, in 2015, militarily intervened in Syria and really took back the role of Russia as a key player on the world stage, which Obama had basically denied by saying Russia is only a regional force and regional player. Actually, Putin at that time had asked the United States to cooperate in calming down the situation in Syria, which Obama had explicitly refused. And instead, he had the CIA arming the jihadists in the northeast of Syria working with the same people who had been involved in 9/11, and so this is what the whole problem was. And now basically you have a cooperation with Trump and Putin to undo this, and basically also work with all the other countries in the region towards a settlement. So people should be happy about that. This is world historical change, ending the interventionist wars, ending the humanitarian right to protect pretext, to violate sovereignty, to go for regime change. I mean, this is really very, very important news. And it just shows you either how malicious the media are or how brainwashed the people are, that they no longer can recognize a peace policy when it is happening in front of their eyes. So obviously the very big question now is the reconstruction. And I think the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry did very well when she blasted the EU, who had naturally put their criticism of Erdogan for making the incursions. So Mrs. Sakharova basically said the Europeans have no role in this at all. They should have, they should help the children or do fundraisers, but they should otherwise stop just giving press conferences because they have no role. So what is now needed is the reconstruction of Syria to start with. There are estimates out that at least $200 billion will be needed, probably more. And the only way that can be done is that the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, are being extended into Syria, and that there is already a division of labor between Russia, Iran, and also China. So other countries should help. The Europeans should stop complaining, but they should actually give up their opposition against Assad, which clearly this whole operation has not succeeded. They failed in toppling Assad, so they should now draw the lesson and help with the reconstruction, but stay out of political meddling.
There are a couple points you just covered that I'd like you to just add a little bit to. I mean, one is what Trump is explicitly saying, that he's allowing these other nations to be sovereign. He says, what's wrong with Syria controlling Syrian territory? This obviously fits in with the whole question of how these larger powers, Russia and the United States, can defend the sovereign rights of other countries as opposed to violating them. Don't you think this is a pretty big deal in terms of ending this era of interventions?
Well, I think Putin made a very interesting speech at the annual Valdai Club meeting this year, a couple of days ago, where he emphasized the need to have a new order emerging based on sovereignty. And there's also another report by the Diplomatic Academy of Russia, Global Challenge 2019, where they note the fact that the West has utterly failed in their policies of regime change against Venezuela, Syria, Ukraine, but that they are still at it, by supporting dissidents in each situation. Actually, the Hong Kong situation is still very hot. But I think we are now at a point where the idea that the West can just, with the premise of Fukuyama that, this is the end of history and democracy has won, which he, basically stated after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which then had led to this whole effort of regime change, trying to topple governments with color revolution. This has now come to an end. And I think, there is now a recognition of who is behind these kinds of policies. And there is a new will by nations to assert their sovereignty, and only the collaboration of sovereign countries working together for a common good, like the Belt and Road Initiative, is actually doing it right now, and has developed a new model of cooperation. That must be the kind of cooperation of the future, of sovereign nations working with each other to their mutual benefit. And the role of the British Empire must come to an end for good.
Well, one institution which doesn't get this principle of sovereignty is obviously the US Congress. We had a vote this week of 354 to 60 to prevent a non-binding vote, but to stop Trump from ending the war. You have people, McConnell, Nancy Pelosi saying all roads lead to Putin, that the US decision the decision by Trump is destabilizing the region, is adding to the chaos. And the fact is that peace is breaking out. How does that add to chaos? So, and then we see the Congress escalating on the Hong Kong front. What can you say about the US Congress, Helga?
Well, I think they are the almost daily proof that the United States at this point, except for what Trump is doing, is not a democracy, but a plutocracy. I think all of these congressmen are on a very short leash of Wall Street. And, you know, the turn of Pelosi is the best example. You know, she recognized at an earlier point that the Democrats are on a clear road to lose the election if they keep only talking about impeachment, when the voters want to hear about jobs and economy and health system and these questions. But then when she went to New York and clearly met with some of the top bankers there, she changed her view. Now, this Congress is obviously, I mean, again, you know, I think what we are looking at, and if people really think about it, both the mainstream media as well as the political leadership of both parties have really changed in their character, and they are really controlled by the intelligence agencies. And, you know, the same people who have been involved in the coup against Trump, Russiagate for 2 years, and now the effort to shift that to Ukraine Gate. These are the same people who are now voting, you know, against the peace in Syria. They're voting for the escalation in Hong Kong. So you can really see that this war party is really what Trump denounced with the military-industrial complex. And, you know, I think it's worth noting that the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned against at the end of his term, is not exactly anymore the same military-industrial complex of that time, but it has merged with what people normally mistakenly call the deep state. Mistakenly, I'm saying, because this military-industrial complex should really be more seen as this Anglo-American intelligence apparatus, which is the arm of the British Empire and which has basically gotten large parts of the US establishment to agree to run the world as an empire, as an unipolar world. So I think that, you know, the Congress is really, you know, in a terrible shape, and I think they will have they will get the lesson. They will learn the lesson at the upcoming election, provided we get there, because there are still enormous dangers and tensions to be overcome until that time.
It's clear that at these rallies, Trump has been referring back to his 2016 campaign, the promise that he would end these endless wars, and saying that this is what the American people support. I know you've seen some of these rallies, you've read what he's saying. What's your assessment? Do you think that he is reaching the American people on this in spite of the treachery of the media and the political leadership?
Well, you know, on the one side, he is, but, you know, we had some colleagues of ours in the United States deployed at these rallies, both in Dallas and also in DC. And what they report is that, you know, our role is so absolutely crucial. We had, for example, signs, you know, like body signs and other signs. Why the rush for impeachment? And why now? And then people would say, yeah, because the Democrats know they can't beat him in 2020. And that is obviously not the answer. The reason is that the financial system is crashing right now. And, you know, also in DC, for example, you know, people came to support Trump and defend him against the danger of impeachment. But then some congressman got up and said, yes, stop the coup. and then proceeded to blast Russia, stand up against Russia. So our people were basically, you know, telling people, look, that is not Trump's policy. Trump is just getting a peace agreement in the Middle East with Russia, and he has said it's a good thing to have a relationship with Russia. So the population, because they're really, you know, they don't have such an easy time if they don't listen to the Schiller Institute and our other publications, because, you know, the problem is you have the mainstream media, but then even Fox TV, the so-called pro-Trump TV, they are ravingly anti-China. So I can only say we are in a really dangerous situation, despite all of these very positive developments, because, I mean, take this tweet, for example, which this so-called comedian Tom Arnold tweeted, referring to the large crowds of Trump's rally in Dallas, saying, don't become too, I don't even want to use this low-level language. John F. Kennedy had large crowds too. And he said that in the context of Trump appearing in Dallas. So obviously this brings back the memory of the Spectator article, this British paper, which appeared in January 2017, where they said that Trump has to be gotten out of the White House one way or another, through a coup, through impeachment, or through murder. So I think we should keep that in mind. We should also keep in mind where this was published. And, you know, you can see that the mainstream media are really absolutely streamlined with this line. For example, you know, there's a program in the German second channel TV called Today's Show, Heute Show, which, you know, in the past they had some funny slapsticks and some cute things. But the last program was an absolutely, I mean, these are not journalists or comedians anymore. These are, you know, I mean, absolutely brutal attacks using the worst kind of language against Trump. And this is all just to create an environment where people really think that Trump is the biggest monster on the planet. And obviously, all of this is the kind of orchestration in which then these kinds of intelligence operation, like an assassination, are absolutely credible. So I think this is a very dangerous situation, and naturally, all of this is fueled by the pending financial crash.
And I want to get to the financial crash in just a second, but one more aspect of the strategic situation is the escalation against China, with Ted Cruz pretending he's a ninja in the Hong Kong crowds. Rubio continues the threats. The Congress is drafting new legislation on Hong Kong. This is also part of the danger. You mentioned regime change, color revolutions. That's absolutely what's underway in China right now, isn't it?
Well, I don't think so. I think they would like to do that, and the situation in Hong Kong is indeed very dire. The effects on the Hong Kong economy are severe, but I don't think that there is any chance to have a successful regime change in the mainland, in the People's Republic of China, because, you know, despite all of this anti-China hysteria, I mean, don't forget that, you know, the Chinese people are absolutely happy with their government. I mean, I have been many times in China, and I'm not saying this because I read some newspapers, but because I have formed my own opinion about it. I have been in China the first time in 1971, and I have been there many times, and I have seen the incredible success of the Chinese economic model, which has brought prosperity to many people. It has alleviated poverty almost, you know, there are a couple of million people who still are in the process of being helped to get out of poverty. So also, you know, I think the West, rather than being so hysterical about China, people should start to think, why is it that the Chinese economic model has been so extraordinarily successful? Why is it that 130 nations work happily with China? Because it is a win-win situation for them? And why is it that the Chinese focus on innovation as the main motor of the economy is so much more successful than profit maximization, which is the characteristic of the neoliberal model? So rather than being in this, in this campaign, being nudged, as Cass Sunstein would call it, with this idea of PR manipulation of the population, I think people should go back and really think for themselves. I mean, my best estimate is that all the accusations of the think tanks, of now a new one, the European Council on Foreign Relations, warning against, that China is coming in the back door in Europe and Germany is trading too much. I mean, these are all absolutely geopolitically motivated attacks, but they have absolutely nothing to do with the reality of China. And people should be happy that China has provided such a model of international cooperation, which, is, if we succeed to get Europe and the United States in a mode of cooperation, like, for example, in the reconstruction of Southwest Asia or the development of Africa, I mean, this is the best way to overcome all of these problems. And I think, the reason why they go after Trump so much is because Trump wants to have a good relationship with Russia. And he has said many times he also thinks that the relationship with China is absolutely crucial. He calls Xi Jinping his good friend, which the Chinese are a little bit doubtful at this moment after this trade war. But Trump wants to improve the relations among these two large countries. And, as we said earlier, between China and India, there is also now a very important rapprochement. So therefore, the stage to do what my late husband always said since many years, that you need the cooperation of the four largest countries, the United States, Russia, China, and India, to overcome the relicts of the British Empire. This is absolutely going in the right direction. And therefore, people should really think about these matters and not just repeat stupid lines by stupid reporters who are no longer reporters, but who are just agents of the intelligence community.
And I'd like to then bring up another aspect of the work of your late husband. After the 2008 crash, he warned that they did not take the right steps, that the policy that came through Obama, the Federal Reserve, and others was a bailout policy and was actually building upon the erroneous axioms that led to the 2008 crash. Now we're seeing the International Monetary Fund reporting that, yes, in fact, the debt has grown. This is a big crisis. How do you see this thing unfolding, especially now that we have this ongoing bailout on the repo markets? Something big is coming up, isn't it?
Well, I think all the signs are that the thing is exploding and that all these measures by the Fed and the other central banks are not working. The IMF at their present semi-annual conference has put out a strong warning that 40% of the US and European corporate debt will detonate if there is a recession. Now, the recession, as they call it, is in full motion. You have a downturn of the real economy anywhere. And, all these measures to, have this 50 to 100 billion overnight repo lending to the banks, to have 2 weeks lending to buy bonds and treasuries through the central banks, all of this is really not functioning. And therefore, we are sitting on an absolute powder keg. Where even the IMF says that if you have a sharp downturn like 2008, you could have waves of bankruptcies, and this could actually lead to a complete turmoil. So all that makes all the more urgent to do exactly what Lyndon LaRouche has worked out so brilliantly, to go with his 4 laws: global Glass-Steagall, national bank in the tradition of Alexander Hamilton, new credit system in the form of a new Bretton Woods system, crash program, through increase in productivity, through development of fusion power, international space cooperation, and then work together with China, Russia, and India on the new paradigm in the new Silk Road. There is a package which would solve the problem very, very quickly, but we simply need more people who help us to bring this on the public agenda. So again, my call to you, don't sit on the fence in an incredible moment like that. Join the Schiller Institute, contact us, spread this program, and just get active with us.
And one other area where Lynn has proven to be absolutely prescient, and it's beginning to come out now from other people, is his emphasis on the British Empire as the source of the problem. The British system versus the American system, British intelligence, the great game, the geopolitics. There's been some articles recently, Helga. What can you report about that?
Well, actually, I think it's very good that if other publications and organizations other than us are starting to really look at the role of the British Empire. Because, there are 2 articles right now in Consortium News. I think this is a blog, one by Pepe Escobar, and he goes in the role of Sykes-Picot, that the way how the Middle East has been manipulated was exactly by the Treaty of Sykes-Picot, when the British and the French divided the territories up in such a way that there would always be room for some ethnic or other conflict, and that basically the role of the British Empire is not over at all, but you can see it in many places. And there's a second article elaborating that. So people should read these things, because, the idea that the British Empire no longer exists is really one of these PR tricks, because my husband many times said the British Empire is like a slime mold. The slime mold changes its color and it's, outward looking, but it remains a slime mold. And what happened after the official British Empire ended, this whole idea of empire simply shifted to the combination of central banks, of investment banks, of hedge funds, of insurance companies, the financial powers to be, which have taken over to a large extent also the multilateral corporations. And that is what we see right now. That's, the British Empire speaks with the voice of the governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who wants to basically decarbonize the whole world economy and direct all investments into green technology, which would be the end of industrial nations and depopulation at a large scale. So if people think the British Empire is no longer there, they just fall for these PR tricks. But if you know how, how these things actually work in terms of who is the power and whose power is now crumbling, that is indeed this financial arm of the British Empire, which, is why we are in all of this trouble. But on the other side, I think many countries around the world, including Trump, including Russia, including China, and many others, they are smarter than ever before. We have world leaders, we have Xi Jinping, we have Putin, Modi, Trump, and that is a good thing. So people who oppose that view should start to think, and maybe they come to better conclusions.
And I think this review of the strategic crises and the financial crisis brings us to an important point, which is that the exoneration of your husband, Lyndon LaRouche, is at the center of the strategic counter coup, that this would be a major initiative that would address almost all of these problems. So people should continue to join with us. We have a petition on the website. And Helga, maybe you want to say something about that, because I think this is something that gets right at the heart of how you defeat this war party.
Well, people should go and go to our LPAC website and look at the documentary of the case of LaRouche. And this is an extremely important way to understand why the apparatus which went after my husband in the 80s and in the 90s, Robert Mueller, William Weld, the same FBI, which is now in the anti-China campaign, the same apparatus which covered up 9/11, the same exact apparatus which is behind the coup against President Trump. So if you want to get the United States back on the track of being a republic, of being a temple of liberty, of a country people are proud to be living in, then help with the exoneration of my husband, spread this documentary, and sign the petition and help us to put this on the agenda, because it's not just the question of the crimes of the past which need to be addressed and remedied, but it is eminently the question that people have to have a clear mind for the solutions which Lyndon LaRouche proposed, because without these, I don't think that we will be able to get out of this really big crisis, but we are very close. So it's worthwhile your effort. Look at the exoneration campaign and join it.
And with that, I think we're at the end of our discussion today. Helga, any final comments?
No, I think it's exciting. I think people should be, you should be worried because we are not out of the danger zone, but you should go about it with a profound sense of optimism that we can bring this world out of a big mess, and we can be part of the solution. So don't be passive. Join us.
Okay, well, we'll end with that and we'll see you next week, Helga.
Next week, I hope.